Hey, this is Karey Dornetto, and you are watching the TV Writers Podcast.
Hosted by Gray Jones, the TV Writer Podcast is brought to you by Script Magazine and ScriptMag.com, the leading source for scriptwriting information in print and on the web, and by Final Draft scriptwriting software, the entertainment industry standard for scriptwriting worldwide. My name's Gray Jones, and I want to welcome you to the TV Writer Podcast, partner of Script Magazine, episode 25 for Monday, June 20th, 2011. Wow, we're at a quarter century, 25 episodes. That's pretty cool. And to celebrate, we have an interview today with TV writer producer Karey Dornetto. She is currently writing for Portlandia, and she's also been a writer producer on Community, The Life and Times of Tim, Dog Bites Man, The Jamie Kennedy Experiment, South Park, and lots more. You're going to love hearing her stories about all different kinds of comedy writing, from different hybrids, sketch shows, traditional sitcoms, and more. So it's going to be very exciting, and I want to get right to it. But before I do, a few of our regular news announcements, and one of them is that if you are not taking part in the TV Writer Chat on Sunday nights, you are missing out. We have lots of fun. We often have special guests, and you can connect with people like Chad Gervich was on this last week, and we have topics that are very exciting to talk about with other writers and wannabe writers. And so to take part in that, just go on Twitter on Sunday nights, and that is at 9:30 p.m. Eastern, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, and whatever other time zone you are, you can figure that out. You can just use the hashtag TVWriterChat, or you can go to tvwriterchat.com, and there's a link in the How to Chat page on how to get to a chat room where you don't have to type that hashtag every time, and it really saves a lot of work in being part of that chat. And also at the TV Writer Chat site, there's a list of topics that are coming up. So it's a very cool thing that you can do to interact and network and learn about TV writing. And also, make sure you do go to tvwriterpodcast.com. Like I said, this is episode 25, and we've had a lot of great interviews with a lot of different types of writers. And so check them out. Check out the ones that have come before, because they're all very current. As you know from watching these podcasts, it's not about a specific show, it's about the path of the writer through the industry. And so even a show that's not on the air anymore, sadly, like V and Human Target, you can learn a lot from the writers that have taken part in the podcast. So I urge you to do that. And also, while you're there, take a gander at the TV Writer Twitter database, which is over 700 writers, their Twitter addresses, and a helpful link at the top that you can, or two links actually now, that you can follow the list in one go. And so there's more instructions on that site. Make sure you take advantage of that resource. So without further ado, forgot to mention the homework that's on the table. Elephant Bucks by Sheldon Bull. I got to meet him at the Toronto Screenwriting Conference this spring, and Sheldon is an amazing teacher, and his book is an excellent book all about comedy. And, I didn't plan it this way, but it seems like I'm talking to a lot of comedy writers in the last few weeks. And so, hey, great resource. Very helpful on the subject of writing comedy. So you can find that at tvwriterpodcast.com. Go to the store link, and it's very inexpensive. There's lots of other books that you can check out there. I think if you order $25 or more, you get free shipping. So, hey, stock up. And it's a great way to help support the podcast. But now, without further ado, let's go to my interview with Karey Dornetto. Enjoy. This is Gray Jones, and I'm here with Karey Dornetto. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing very well. And you have done a number of cool shows. Most recently, you're in Portland, working on Portlandia. But I want to know what happened up to that point. And I'm sure there are a lot of people that will be very excited to hear your story and how you got started and how you got onto so many cool shows. So, if you don't mind, we could take it right back. Where did you grow up?
I am, first of all, thanks for having me. I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, on a military campus, the Citadel. My dad was a professor, and then my 12 years of Catholic school, mom's an ex-nun, so like a very sort of strict background, but I think it's cool. But that's where I grew up, and then I ended up going to college in the South and eventually like moving to New York. And I can get into that story later if that's the question. I think your only question was where are you from? There we go, Charleston.
Cool. So you got to New York, and was that for school?
No, I guess I could tell you sort of my path into comedy. Mm-hmm. Well, I went to the University of South Carolina, and I was a finance major because my dad was like, there's no way in hell you're going to be a drama major or do anything like that, because I was always interested in that. So I was like, fine, whatever, I'll do that. And then I got a job in finance right out of college, and I was working on a trading floor, bond trading floor, and I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina for 2.5 years, and all I did was like in my spare time was like write and then try to like audition for stuff because I still was kind of like not sure. I was not quite brave enough to do stand up. And then finally, there was a sketch comedy group there that like had live shows every week. And so I auditioned for that. I got them in the group. It was called The Perch. Mm-hmm. They're still there and they're great. And we like wrote and performed like 4 live shows a weekend. So I did that for a while. And that was like, oh, this is what I want to do for like, definitely want to do this. So then I ended up moving to New York through my company, Bank of America Securities.
So you're still doing finance at that point?
Yeah, I did finance right out of college for 5 years and did comedy at night. Mm-hmm. So it was like, that was my day job. It was actually a great day job to have because it was not a take-home day job whatsoever. It's like, you're done, you don't think about it. So in all my spare time, I was just writing and performing. And then eventually at some point, I decided, I was like, I think writing is what I want to do. Like, I like performing, but I want to write. And because I'd written some stuff for like some online, but zines or whatever my friends were doing. And so, and people liked it. So I ended up going out to LA for a visit and meeting up with some like agents there and stuff and just being like, oh, how do you become a comedy writer? And like the long story short is that I met this guy who was like, oh yeah, South Park is looking for a writer, female writer, and can I read some of your stuff? Blah, blah, blah. I gave it to him. He liked it. They liked it. And I ended up moving out to LA and getting a job on South Park.
Wow. So that was your first gig?
My very first gig. And it was a crazy connection to an agent that I had that specifically liked what I gave him. It was just, everything fell in line. And I know it's such a crazy story that happened because I was really meeting with him just to be like, hey, I want to be a comedy writer. What do I do? And he was like, well, here, you need to write specs. He just told me what you do. Mm-hmm. And then he just was like, but if I would be, you do stand up, I'll take a look like at your stuff. I'm sure he wasn't really expecting, I don't know, but it was very nice of him to do that. And he's been my agent but yeah, that's how it happened for me.
Wow.
So it was a crazy story. Yeah. So I ended up moving out to LA in it was 2003 when I moved out here. And then I just stayed. And yeah, so that was like my start.
Wow. So tell me, I mean, maybe we can slow it down just a little bit because I know there's billions of people out there who are going to listen to this and they're shaking their fists at you because they've been trying for years and they haven't gotten a lucky break like that. So what had you written by that point? Like, what did you give him as writing samples?
Some of the stuff that I given him were personal essays. I had 5 different personal essays, just stuff about my childhood and just funny stuff I'd written. And then another thing I gave him was this series of weird, really, really short stories. A lot of the stuff is on my website. Mm-hmm. A lot of the things.
Oh, you might as well tell me where's your website?
KareyDornetto.com.
Great.
So the stories are some of the stuff on there, and the other thing, but there was a bunch of sketches I'd written too, but that's not on there. But I'd written some sketches and stuff I'd written for The Perch, and then the other thing was I had these drawings, really weird, called 101 Ways to Shave Your Ass. They're these I drew these. It's weird. Also, I have a website for that, but I don't want to be plugging everything. You just look on my website. My regular website, if you feel so inclined to peruse all that stuff is on there. But yeah, so it was a lot of weird stuff that was kind of a collection of things I was interested in. And the specific story that he really liked was Fat Basketball Diaries. Mm-hmm. That was the one that he really took to. So it was sent around and stuff. So, I mean, I honestly think that he really liked my writing, and so it's really about someone reading you and getting your point of view. And I just so happened that he got mine, and very lucky for me that it happened that way.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many different ways people get into it, and people ask me all the time, and I hate telling people how it happened because I feel like it just seems so easy. But, you know, I was like doing stand up at night in New York and working on the training floor, but doing other, like working like for 5 years, doing stuff like just wanting to like get that break. And then it did happen. So, but it is kind of those stories where I feel like such an asshole. I'm like, yeah, I just got a meeting and then God, I got a job. You know, it sort of sounds like, yeah.
I do think the detail of it, slowing it down like that, is it isn't just, you know, guy off the boat meets an agent and boom, gets a job, because obviously you had a pretty wide body of material at that point that showed your comedic voice, showed your potential not just in one area. And so it wasn't like that you just met him cold. No. I mean, I did have stuff to give him, and I had been doing stand up for a while in New York, and like I had my own like little show in Chinatown, and I was like, you know, I mean, that is the most important thing, is generating some volume of work to show people. And once you get that opportunity to be like, hey, check here, you know, you have something to get somebody. So that is important for sure. And so if that would have happened like a few years earlier, I wouldn't have had anything, you know. So yeah, for sure, you meet someone, and if you have it ready, then all the stars align, and, you know. Very cool. So you were just finding out how to be a comedy writer, and you walked into the room of South Park. So what was that like? It was intense, and it was crazy because I was such a, you know, I mean, I was sort of a little in awe that I was there. So it took me a while to even kind of check in with myself and be like, I can't believe this is happening. But it was cool. They're great. They're both geniuses, and it was an amazing experience. It was great too. It's a first writing job because they do write everything, and they really use the room as a bouncing board, and that's kind of what I did. So as far as for someone coming in and not having done it before, and also for like a stand-up who, you know, isn't generally used to like breaking stories, and like you know, jokes is different. It's a lot different than stories. So it was a good learning experience for me. I mean, every room I've been in, you know, is different, and it's always like great to learn different types of shows. And so for a first job, it was great because it was just being in a room and like sort of absorbing as much as I could, and hopefully getting stuff in if I could. So it was great. Very, very cool. And you were on South Park for 2 years, was it? No, it was just one season. Just one season? One season on South Park, yeah. And then came, was it right from there to Jamie Kennedy Experiment? Yeah, right from there I wrote on Jamie Kennedy, and that job was pretty much a sketch show, I would say, with real people. So for that show, getting that job, I actually just went in and pitched some ideas, and then they liked my ideas and hired me off the bat. Interesting. Yeah, that's the first time I've done it that way. That's the first time I've ever gone in to like, and just like had to pitch, and they liked it. So that was how that show went. Is that something you've done since, or was that just that one time? Specifically to get a job, I don't think I've done that before. I mean, usually like at that point, like I was writing specs. That was like for South Park, they liked my original material, and they didn't need like a spec sample, like, you know, of an existing show, and they didn't. That's not something they needed. For Jamie Kennedy, same thing. It was a sketch show. I had like other stuff that they could look at. They didn't need like a half-hour office or whatever, just throwing out a show. But so that's how that worked. And then in the meantime, I was writing specs. And then I got on Jamie Kennedy, and that I didn't write a spec for to get it on the show. I mean, most shows they read your sample. Yeah. Like they read an original. So now you've been in LA for 2 or 3 years by this point. No, I actually only been like maybe like a year. Oh, like a year! Wow. Like a year, yeah. The jobs are fast. These jobs are really quick. Yeah, but you must have had a chance by this point to get a flavor of comedy writing, and you were getting to know people in this. Were you thinking at that point that you wanted to get more onto structured shows, or were you just happy where you were? Or because it does look like after that you started moving towards more structured sitcoms. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was like always kind of my goal. I mean, you know, it's not my goal. As I worked on these shows, I was like, oh, I'd get interested in different shows and like, oh, I'd be cool to work on that show. And because I was writing specs and like watching a lot more like, you know, half-hour stuff, I was like, oh, I think it'd be cool. Like I like, you know, telling like stories and more character-driven stuff. But really, for me, if the show is funny, I get excited and I can get excited about it. I would like to write on it. Mm-hmm. That's what excites me more. But I do generally like telling like more character-based like story stuff. Mm-hmm. I also like absurd sketching. You know, I'm kind of all over the map. Like I've kind of done all sorts of different things. So it just really depends on the show and if it's the right fit for sort of my sense of humor. Mm-hmm. I mean, it wasn't super conscious. It was more like, you know, I think I want to try this and see how I like it. Because I'd done animation. I did South Park, and then Jamie Kennedy was more sketch. And I was like, but it was really just me sort of feeling it all out. Mm.
So after Jamie Kennedy, according to IMDb, which often has holes, you did a few different things. You've Got a Friend, at Arrested Development. Was that a freelance script for them, or were you on staff?
No. I worked on the third season of Arrested Development. I guess if we went in order. So from Jamie Kennedy, I worked on this other sort of like hybrid reality. It's kind of like a punk type show, so I did that for a season. And then I worked on another animated show for a little bit on MTV2 called Chico and Guapo. I don't know if that's on there. And then I got on Arrested Development, and that was my first half-hour live-action sitcom that I ever worked on.
Mm-hmm. So you were a staff writer on season 3?
Season 3, yeah. Mm-hmm. And that was amazing. I was super pumped about that, and just because I was a huge fan of the show. And that was like my real, like, my first, like, network. Well, Jamie Kennedy was a network show, but my first network half-hour single camp show. And so it was kind of a whole different world. A really intense room and super fun and like just a big learning curve, but very, 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 very cool. So that was the first episode of half-hour episode I wrote with Arrested Development. So.
Very, very cool. And so tell me a little bit more about the room in terms of how an episode was structured on that show. Because I know with multi-camera it's very different than single camera.
Oh, as far as how the show is structured, like the storylines, or
no, just the logistics of putting together an episode.
Oh, putting together an episode. Yeah, I mean, usually, you know, we would like in the beginning of the season, it would start out with just sort of going around the table and just pitching out ideas and just anything, and then sort of we would map out like if there were any sort of seasonal arcs that we wanted to do, we would figure those out like in general terms, and then just sort of dive into the first episode, figuring out what that was going to be. And it was all kind of done. I usually would split in two groups. One group would be working on the current episode, another people would be breaking another story. And then from there, depending on who's writing it, you know, as a group, we'd figure out the beats of the story. So we'll go outline, then bring it back into the room, break that down. And then on Arrested Development, it was different because like not everybody went off and wrote drafts. A lot of things were written in the room. Mm-hmm. That was a lot different than like how it would work on Community. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot more like full group written stuff, or like also really group rewritten. But in general, it would be like if you were going, like when I went off to write my draft, I had like go out on the outline, get notes on the outline, write the draft. The draft goes back in the room, gets rewritten with everybody or a small group, and especially Mitch would have like his show. So that's sort of the process of that.
Very, very cool. Yeah. And by this point, you've still only been in LA, like, what, 3 years?
At that point, that was like 2004. So yeah, that was, and 2002 is when I moved to LA. So.
Wow.
Or was it 2005, I think?
Yeah.
I can't remember. It was, it'd been a few years, like two or 3 years.
Wow. So you had a busy time from when you got there.
Yes, I did. It's sort of like still a whirlwind. I'm always like, wait, when did that happen? Yeah.
Very cool. And so after Arrested Development, was it Dog Bites Man after that?
Oh, did I do that after that? I can't remember now. Yes, I think I did. Yeah. Did I work? Yeah, I did. After that, I worked on Dog Bites Man, which was a super cool show on Comedy Central. Mm-hmm. Matt Walsh and 80 Miles, Andrea Savage, and of course Zach Galifianakis. Mm-hmm. So it was very much in the vein of Borat-ish thing, because it was half scripted, half, well, I guess Borat wasn't scripted. Well, maybe it was. Yeah, it was. There was half scripted. Well, the guy, one of the writers on Borat was the EP, Dan Mazer on Dog Bites Dan. And so anyway, they were a news team, and it was half scripted and half improv with real people. And so that was another sort of hybrid, but there was a lot more writing, like full-on writing done than I would say from the other sort of hybrid reality shows I worked on. Because we would film full scenes, and then we'd have just a million jokes of things that could happen in the scene. So that was a little bit of an interesting. It's always hard to write when you're dealing with real people, because you kind of have to guess the scenario of what they might do in the situation. So. But then, of course, you've got these amazing improvers, so they had to deal with those people. But yeah, so that was fun. It was a lot of also breaking stories, figuring out, coming up with what the stories were. So it was similar, but just a lot less actual scripted writing.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that was similar a little bit to your experience on Jamie Kennedy?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, there was no one would know usually until the filming was completely finished, and we were in that it wasn't a real thing. There was no prank. It was more they tried to keep it real and not let people know what was happening, because they were playing a news crew, so they could be filmed as a real news team. So yeah, the scenarios would be similar, but the show was more structured, a half hour, whereas Jamie Kennedy was just actual sketches. Each episode had storylines in them, so it was a half hour narrative going on, but it was with real people in there. So each story each episode had a beginning, middle, and end with things going on with the characters and little emotional tiny arcs and things like that. Whereas Jamie Kennedy was just sketches with real people. Whereas this was, I think honestly in my opinion, it was a little confusing, because not that type of show hadn't really been done yet, and so I think it was the viewer. They're wait, is this really real people? And it was a little
maybe a bit ahead of its time.
Maybe. I mean, I don't want to go out on a limb and say that, but I definitely think it was doing. Yeah, and they ended up putting a disclaimer, I think, after the first episode in front of it, explaining it a little bit, and I always thought that was kind of maybe not a good time that you had to explain stuff to people, but
this is not a real news crew. Right.
Because I think people didn't realize that's an added element of what's going on there.
Well, I must say it's neat that you were able to work in so many different types of shows, and I mean, really. I don't want to say cutting edge or anything like that, but new ideas, Jamie Kennedy. I remember when Jamie Kennedy came on the air, and it was a very new thing at the time. And then after that, there were a whole bunch of other similar shows that came, but I remember it being very fresh. And it sounds like Dog Bites Man was very, very much the same, that it was experimenting with a different kind of a hybrid. And then you got to do animation, you got to do more traditional scripted stuff. So, again, sort of at that point now. Oh, and also, were you still doing stand up at that time?
Yeah, I was doing it a little bit. It got a little bit harder to do when I was working on Arrested Development, because the timing and the hours. It was difficult to really do anything at night, and on the weekends I just wanted to pass out if I wasn't working. So I'd still do it off and on, but it's a muscle that when you don't get on stage in a long time, when I'm not doing it a lot, it's to get back up there is really exciting. Also, I feel I might, the day before I go up, I might die. So I'm just I can't do this. It's really hard. Yeah. And then after I do it, I'm really excited. I'm I want to keep doing this, but
yeah.
So I mean, I've even been thinking about doing it recently, but luckily I have some local shows in LA that some friends of mine do that sometimes I'll get up on, but I haven't done it in a while. But I still like to do, I've written been in a bunch of shorts. So I do that in my spare time too. act in and write and shoot stuff. And that's a little bit easier than actually getting on stage. If I really need to get my performing out.
Yeah.
If I'm feeling the urge. So I guess to answer your question in a giant roundabout way, I was doing it every once in a while. I was doing it probably more than I am now back then, a few years ago.
Yeah.
It just depended on the show, whether I had time or not.
So we're going to jump ahead a little bit. I don't want to give short shrift to the things you did in the middle, but getting more current towards Life and Times of Tim, Community. Tell me a little bit about getting onto. I know Community is just this huge show now. But were you on from the very beginning?
On Community, I came in on episode 12 of season 1. So episode 13 until the end of the second season. So about a little more than half of season 1 and then all of season 2.
So you'd already had a chance to see a little bit of it.
I've seen a little bit. I mean, I honestly, I was working on Life and Times of Tim when I jumped from Life and Times of Tim to Community. And I remember reading the pilot and seeing the pilot and being really excited about it. And when I found out, and I hadn't really, when I found out that there was a job opening, I was super excited because I'd also been a fan of Dan from Channel 101 and Sarah Silverman show because I met with him before, at some point, and about that show. So I was really, really excited to work with him and work on that show. And so it just happened that they had some spots open. And so, yeah, I was very excited about it. Coming in at that time, it was the show had just sort of got, I remember watching, I think it was the Christmas episode and the Halloween episode in the first season. And those were the episodes I was yeah, this show's really special. And I was very excited to work on it. So it was very cool and getting on there and having to jump right in and get caught up on what everything that was going on.
Now, Community, you were telling me a little bit before the podcast, it was a pretty busy schedule. Tell me a little bit about the process for an episode for that show and maybe how it compared to something like Arrested Development.
It was pretty similar, I would say, to Arrested Development, although, let's see, I guess I'll take it from the beginning. I mean, when I first started, I came in kind of in the middle, so I basically came in right away and ended up pitching some ideas, and they liked one of them, and so that was just kind of okay, let's do that. And then as the small group basically we broke the story and figured out what it was going to be, and then went off on outline, got notes on my outline, and then went off on script, and then came back, went off on draft, come back with a draft, get notes, and then do a rewrite with this group, and then, and when I say get notes, you get notes usually from the writers first, and then Dan would come in and he would give notes and we'd fix it from there, and there's a lot of tweaks and stuff, and then it's and then after that, as a group, as a small group, you'll rewrite it, and then Dan would take a pass at it. That's how it went first season. Dan would do his own pass on the script. It was a little different second season.
Yeah, and second season was a larger staff.
Just a little bit. I think we just had one more addition, but second season was different. Same thing, but then instead of Dan taking his own pass at the script, we would do it as a smaller group. So the final rewrite would be, if it was your episode, it would be you, Dan, and maybe one other writer. And which is nice because then the smaller the group it is, and the more ownership you have over your draft. And I mean, and depending on how the script goes, some stories are tighter than others, and there's not much changes. I mean, when things have to be changed structurally, it ends up just getting rewritten a lot more than if everything structurally stays the same. I would say I wrote the Halloween episode in season 2, and we spent a really long time figuring that story out. It was a zombie episode, so it got really complicated, and we looked at all sorts of weird scenarios of what the story would be, and then we ended up just making it really simple. And then once that was figured out, and which took a month, it took a really long time, a month, I would say, to figure that story out, breaking it and writing outlines and being that's not working. I mean, it took a while, but once we did figure it out, and I went off the draft, when it came back, then it was really easy to rewrite it and change stuff. So that rewrite was like really simple, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if there's like big story problems, and it's funny because like sometimes you can go up writing a draft and you're like, I know this isn't working, and you know there's going to be some things that need to be changed later, and that's hard too. And sometimes just as it gets later in the season, the time that you have to break a story, sometimes you don't have as much time. So in that sense, sometimes things aren't figured out until you start writing it and you're like, oh, you know what, this is not going to work. And you can try to fix it, but then it just, you know, as a group later, you end up having to re-break an entire storyline. Then it's, you know, that's when you're like working till like 4 a.m. or, you know. So that happens. That just happens. And sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. It just depends.
Yeah. So speaking about 4 a.m, you were mentioning that the pace of Community was something that was a bit hard for the long haul. And so you decided to take a gig on Portlandia.
Yes. Which I'm very excited about, yeah.
Yeah, so tell me about this move, which actually was a move, getting you out of LA and to Portland, Oregon, of all places.
Yeah, I'm in Portland right now.
Yeah. So tell me about that move. I mean, a lot of people that watch the podcast are sort of at the beginning end of things, and everybody's saying move to LA because that's where the action is. That's where things happen. And now you are well out of LA. So what's it like?
Oh, I mean, you know, I'm not going to be here that long. A lot of the Fred is on SNL in New York, and Karey is from Portland, but she travels a lot too. And Jonathan Crystal, who's the director, also a writer, is from LA. So a lot of the people involved, there's a ton of local people involved as well in the production, but the writers are mostly from LA. Mm-hmm. So it's not a permanent move, but it's a really fun move for a while because it's a really great city. Yeah, I mean, as far as like deciding to work on the show, I was a huge fan of it when it came out, and I just thought it was so unique and refreshing and like just sort of spot on about a lot of the places I've lived, and I've lived in Brooklyn and I lived in Silver Lake, and it was just such a fresh show. I was super excited, and yeah, so here I am. And it was also fun because I hadn't worked on a sketch show. Actually, this is really the first full-on sketch show that I've ever worked on, and sketch is what I started out doing. So it's something I really love, and I've always been a huge fan of SNL, and as I feel like most people my age growing up watched it, and everyone's watching it, knows about it, and so it wasn't that big of a decision to make, other than, you know, deciding whether or not to go back on Community. And for me, I just wanted to try something different. And since I was such a fan of the show, it was like, and very excited to go to Portland.
Yeah.
I decided to do it. Yeah. And luckily they wanted to have me. So here I am.
Mm-hmm. Well, and do you find the change of scenery is helpful for your writing?
I mean, being in Portland is definitely helpful since the show is about Portland, or about a lot of the people in Portland. So yeah, I definitely think being here. I mean, the first 2 weeks we did writing in LA, and that was a lot of the bulk of like my first, like the chunk of my ideas that I threw out there. I'd done it in LA, but now living here, it's like getting used to like the actual like Portland culture and the people, and just getting to explore it. You know, ideas sort of pop into your head, and just in writing it, you have to be here. Yeah, it is inspiring in that sense that, you know, you want to be in the place that you're writing about if you can. It's like research/inspiration. Yeah.
So now we're getting towards the end, and what we always do at the end is tips for breaking in. And now you have been involved in so many different types of shows now, in the comedy sort of realm. Maybe you could even speak to a couple of different things, like getting onto a sketch show, or let me ask this. A lot of people say that if you want to get a job in comedy, that you got to do stand-up. Do you think that's true?
No, I don't think so. I really don't. I mean, I think I wouldn't recommend it unless you really love it, because it's such a hard career choice. But if you feel so inclined to get on stage and be brutalized, I say go for it. But I think any way that you can hone a point of view is your best ticket. But now that there's so many different ways to be seen and get your writing to the public. I mean, I know people who have Twitter accounts and have have a following, and people know who they are just through that. You can do that and be funny and write little, there's just so many different ways to do it. I mean, I do know that for one of the producers, one of the showrunners, EPs on Community had just watched a short that I had done, and he really liked it. And so it was having a variety of things to show people, I think, is important. But I would say tips would be, write what you generally are excited about, that inspires you, but I don't think there's any one way to do it. I mean, the best thing about doing stand-up or doing sketch would be that you get to try things out and be on stage and perform, and it's a way to sort of be heard in that way. Mm-hmm. But I think you can do it online as well. I guess just write. That's all I can really say, and try to get people to read it. or hear it. Yeah.
Very, very cool. And I guess for comedy, it's really important to do what inspires you, right?
Yeah. The first kind of things that I wrote about would be my background and my family. And then I find all that, to me, that's interesting, where people come from and what their stories are. And I find that, you don't have to go to a certain school and major in this and, go to film school. I think if you have something to say, that's what matters, and it doesn't really matter whether you have this certain specific path that a lot of writers have. I need to go to this school and I need to go to this. I just think there's just many different ways to get to that point, that there's no one specific way.
Very, very cool. Oh, and speaking of Twitter, people can follow you on Twitter at Karey Dornetto.
Yes. I haven't been tweeting much, but except I was in a bike accident, so you can see my gross leg that I fell.
Oh, no.
Big Portland thing. I'm fine. It's okay.
Okay. Cool. So, Karey, thank you so much for your time. It's been so fun hearing all your stories about all these different types of comedy shows and how you got involved. And I really appreciate you sharing your stories with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Hosted by Gray Jones, the TV Writer Podcast is brought to you by Script Magazine and ScriptMag.com, the leading source for scriptwriting information in print and on the web. And by Final Draft scriptwriting software, the entertainment industry standard for scriptwriting worldwide.